meeting. All right, and we should be good to go. All right. So again, good afternoon to everyone, and welcome, and thank you all for joining today's webinar and grant solicitation webinar, the OJJDP FY 2020 Delinquency Prevention Program Solicitation. My name is William Moore, and I am with OJJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. And as your technical host, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of the Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements to keep in mind. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded. Our webinar will be linked to our YouTube page at a later date. For those wishing to download a copy of important documents and resources related to today's webinar, you may do so by locating the Handouts pod directly above the chat area. Here, you will find important information, including the PowerPoint for today's grant solicitation and an FAQ for webinar participants that will likely address any technical related questions. Simply click on the name of the file and then click the download button. At the end of today's webinar, there will be a Q&A session where the presenter will address any questions that you all have posed during today's presentation. Please type your questions into the chat box as they arise. For those of you participating in today's grant solicitation webinar as a group, please take a minute to help us count. If you are viewing by yourself, there's no need to type anything at this time. However, if you're viewing with others, so yourself and maybe another individual, please type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you're viewing alone, there's no need to type anything at this time, but if you're viewing with another individual, please type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. All right. So that being said, again, thank you all for joining us for today's presentation. I will now turn it over to our moderator and presenter, Ms. Carmen Santiago-Roberts, for today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. We are excited to have that many people attending this webinar. It shows the importance and the need for this type of program funding. My name is Carmen Santiago-Roberts. I'm a grant manager in the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, or OJJDP. And as Michael said, as William said, I will be moderating today's webinar. I also want to highlight the Response Center information on this slide. So additional questions that are not answered today may be directed to this Response Center. Again, welcome to the Delinquency Prevention Program webinar. The webinar provides an overview of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, or OJJDP, fiscal year 2020 Delinquency Prevention Program Solicitation. And it gives you the best chance to be successful with the application process. That's the goal. In today's webinar, we're going to provide you with a general overview of the Delinquency Prevention Program Solicitation, including the goals and objectives and the federal requirements of this program solicitation. Hopefully you have already read the solicitation, but if not, we highly recommend that you do that after this webinar. To access the solicitation, we're providing you with the link listed on the slide. You will hear me saying again and again the importance of reading the solicitation entirely. from page 1 to the last page. It is critical. You don't want to miss important information and requirements as you write your proposal. There are many links included throughout the solicitation. These links provide you with additional information about what is required in your application and resources to help you complete your proposal. The application is due on Tuesday, April 21st, 2020 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. This is a hard set deadline, so please try to submit your proposal earlier if you can. This program will be funded for up to 5 years. The overall goal of the Delinquency Prevention Program is to support state, local, and tribal efforts to prevent youth from entering the juvenile justice system. There are 2 categories in this solicitation. The first one is Category 1, the State Delinquency Prevention Program, and Category 2, Tribal Delinquency Prevention Program. I will talk now about eligibility for each one of the categories. For Category 1, State Delinquency Prevention Program, only the designated state agency, or DSA, overseeing the OJJDP Title II Formula Grants Program is eligible to apply under this category. The DSA must have in place a state advisory group, or SAG, as required by the Formula Grants Program and the Juvenile Justice Reform Act, or JJRA. And the state must be in compliance with all requirements of the Title II program, including the 4 core requirements of the JJDPA Amendment JJRA in 2018. For Category 2, which is the Tribal Delinquency Prevention Program, only federally recognized tribes or a consortium of tribes can apply. I'm sorry, I'm moving along here. I'm gonna, yeah, okay, this is, I'm gonna go over the Category 1 Delinquency Prevention Programs. State awarded under this solicitation are required to provide sub-grants to units of local government to carry out the objectives of this program. The DSA should evaluate the capacity of eligible entities and give priority to ULG, or units of local government, that demonstrate the ability in developing data-driven and evidence-based prevention programs. For information and resources on evidence-based programs or practices, see the OJP Grant Application Resource Guide and the OJJDP Model Programs Guide. Both links are on page 6 of the solicitation. Now I would like to go over the allocation, the funding allocation for Category 1, State Delinquency Prevention Program. OJJDP expects to make up to 9 grants under this category. The estimated maximum dollar amount for each award will be $1 million. The project will start on October 1st, 2020, and it will be for a performance duration of 60 months or 5 years. That's for Category 1 State Delinquency Prevention Program. The total amount anticipated to be awarded is $8.6 million. Moving on now to talk about Category 2 Tribal Delinquency Prevention Program. The successful applicant will be required to support the development and implementation of programs to address juvenile delinquency in tribal communities and enhance responses to juvenile delinquency in tribal jurisdictions. For Category 2, the Tribal Delinquency Prevention Program, OJJDP, expects to make up to 3 grants. The estimated maximum dollar amount for each award will be $500,000. The total amount anticipated to be awarded is $1.5 million. And the project will start on October 1st, 2020. And it will be for a performance duration of 60 months. When you identify the delinquency prevention activities and a project timeline that meets the needs of the target population, please make sure that you tell us what category you're applying for. The application elements are listed on pages 8 through 10 of the solicitation, and we're asking you to tell us in detail the nature and scope of the problem this funding is going to address. Describe the specific strategies you plan to use to achieve goals and objectives, and how the program will operate during the funding period. Okay, now I'm going to spend some time talking about Office of Justice Programs, Priority Areas. These are new priority considerations. OJP is giving priority consideration to applications that consider the needs of rural communities, the individuals who will benefit from the grant in poverty areas and or persistent poverty counties, and serve economically distressed areas or what is called qualified opportunity zones or POZs. I will encourage you to review the information and resources provided on page 6 of the solicitation to help you determine which priority areas you can apply to receive consideration. Also, I want to just note in here that applicants proposing to receive priority consideration under any of these areas should provide a sufficient narrative explanation to include documentation. Pages 11 and 12 of the solicitation provides you further information about what documentation is required or must be included as an attachment. And this is for the Qualified Opportunity Zone or QOZ. Applicants must include description detailing how the project will enhance public safety in QOZs. And the link to QOZs is actually listed on page 6 of the solicitation, not on page 12. Apologies for that error on the slide. Okay, now moving to budget. We're recommending that you draft your budget early in the application writing process. Some things to highlight here. Your budget should not include any expenses that are not directly supporting the project design and narrative. Personnel costs should connect directly to the project design. Each budget item should have a brief narrative explanation. The solicitation has a link for the budget template. You can find a link to this template on the OJP Grant Resource Guide and also in OJP website. A hyperlink is provided in the frequently asked questions, which is one of the handouts in today's presentation for easy access. And the budget detail worksheet and budget narrative are combined in a single document. I just want to also note here that no more than 10% of grant funds awarded under Category 1, this is just for Category 1, may be used for planning and administration and to support local entities. The remainder of funds should be to sub-grants. Again, this is just for Category 1, the state delinquency prevention program. Okay, moving now to performance measures. Two things to highlight about performance measures. Please review the complete list of mandatory performance measures for this program before writing the proposal. The link is on page 10 of the solicitation. This will help you to think of what data you will be expected to provide semi-annually to the federal government to measure program outcomes. You're not required to submit performance data with your application, but you should tell us you plan to collect required performance data. Failure to submit performance measures data will result in suspension of grant funding. We're providing you with the link to the Office of Justice Programs performance measurement page for an overview of the performance measurement activities and also to the progress reporting tools. There are two important resources that will help you through the application process. The first one is the Office of Justice Program Grant Application Resource Guide, and you find that link to that guide on page 1 of the solicitation. This guide provides guidance on how to prepare and submit the application for funding to OJP. It is a great resource, and I will add that you can, print it or put it in your favorites and refer to this guide through your writing the proposal. It's very, very helpful. The other resource is the application checklist found on pages 16 through 18 or Appendix A. It's what an application should include, checklist. This is a great tool to help you in developing your application and ensuring you have all the resources necessary to complete the application process. The next item here to talk about is the following application elements must be included in the application to meet the basic minimum requirements to advance to peer review and receive consideration for funding. These two elements are the program narrative and the budget detail worksheet and budget narrative. Sorry. Some additional tips to share with you is the Grants 101. It's an excellent resource. We're providing you with the URL for easy access. It provides an overview of OJP grants and funding, all the information you need to know about the life of a grant, starting with steps to follow before you apply, steps to follow while writing the proposal, and steps to follow when submitting the application. You will find a lot of answers to your questions in this website. If new to applying for federal funds, do the following now: acquire a DUNS number, register with SAM, and register with grants.gov. It can take 10 to 14 business days to complete the process highlighted above. Again, read entire solicitation carefully for all application requirements. Identify, contact project partners as soon as possible and request letters of support. Other additional tips, as you begin to review the selection criteria and develop your proposal outline, take care not to skip questions or omit components of the program narrative as described in the solicitation. Answer each question and follow the order of the review criteria. Understand what percentage each section is worth under review criteria. Draft budget early in the process. Physically check every item off on the application checklist before submission. And I will add to perhaps have someone else to, look at the application checklist, making sure that everything has been included before you hit submit. Aim to submit 2 days before deadline in case you have challenges submitting. And again, I would say if you can submit it 3 or 4 or 5 days before deadline, that would be ideal. There are a lot of solicitations now and submitted to OJP, so you may want to avoid some technical challenges if you submit by the deadline. Some useful links we wanted to share with you is the program announcement solicitation and the frequently asked questions. This is kind of like a summary of the solicitation. And the 2020 Office of Justice Program Grant Application Resource Guide. It is actually, like I said earlier, a wonderful resource, and we want to make sure that you have that information available. Okay, so now we're going to move to Q&A, and I just want to mention that the Response Center is on the slide, and I'm not sure if we're going to be able to go over all the questions, but if we are not, I will encourage you to submit your questions to the Response Center after the webinar, and we will work with the Response Center to provide you answers to any questions that we might not be able to answer here today. I would like to pause now and just kind of look and see if we have any questions, submit it in the chat box. Okay, I also wanted to introduce Santana Dean. She is with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, and she had been so kindly to take some time off of her really busy schedule to be here with us and address some of the questions that you may have. So I will turn it over to Santana to answer the first question. Thank you, Santana.
You're most welcome, Carmen. Good afternoon, everyone. I see we have a question here that says, for Category 1, can an agency apply for this grant if they have a letter of commitment from the SAG and if they've agreed to be a subawardee? For this particular question, if you have reviewed the eligibility criteria for the solicitation, the actual requirements for the solicitation are pretty detailed as far as who can apply. For example, the solicitation states, and Carmen has already kind of spoken on this, that it has to be only the designated state agency by the chief executive officer of the state, which is usually the governor, and they have to have a state advisor group and be in compliance with each of the core requirements of the JJDP and as well as a fully participating and fully eligible under that program. And so if the particular state agency has not met all of the requirements as listed under Category 1, they would not be eligible for funding. And because of these requirements, this eligibility criteria is not one that can be subgranted.
Thank you, Santana. I
Sure.
also wanted I also wanted to thank the participants for submitting questions prior to the webinar. I'm going to go over a few just to give the benefit of everybody else. One question that came in asked, will an after-school program be eligible for this grant? So I think Santana kind of alluded to this, but funding priorities are set by eligible applicants under Category 1 and Category 2. So applicants must determine the type and scope of the program under this solicitation. Another question, Another question that came in is where the 10% of administrative costs can go to. So the answer is administrative costs can be used to cover any costs related to the administration and management of the grant, including but not limited to salary, travel, and training and technical assistance. This is only for Category 1, State Delinquency Prevention Program. This 10% requirement does not apply for Category 2, Tribal Delinquency Prevention Program.
Okay. Thank you, Carmen. I'll respond to a couple of the other questions.
Okay.
One of the questions is under Category 1. Portion of the grant is the $1 million budget to be used over the 60-month period of performance. The answer is yes. Any funds awarded under this grant under Category 1 or Category 2 would be used over the full period of performance for this grant. Another question is, do schools count as units of local government? Excuse me. So a school would only be considered a unit of local government if they are chartered through the city or the county, but an individual school in and of itself would not be considered a unit of local government. If a school is attached through the county school board or something of that nature, the applicant most likely would not be the individual school. It would be the actual county or government entity that is applying for those funds on behalf of the school or the organization attached to that school. Do we have to have an RFP process to award subgrants, or can we do a contract? Actually, the state and local community should most likely look at a sub-award process because it's not necessarily a particular service that is being offered, and you want to be able to ensure that local communities have a fair opportunity to apply and compete for those funds versus doing an individual contract with one particular entity or one particular community-based organization that should actually be competed so that all communities within the state have an opportunity to fairly apply for these funds. Another question is, my school is tribally controlled but BIE funded. Would this possibly affect our application process? If BIE is able to certify the application as far as being on behalf of the tribe, that should be sufficient, but just remember that it's either Category 1 or Category 2 funding, and you would have to determine exactly if, however, the structure of that organization is outlined, if it meets the eligibility requirements. We'll actually review that once the applications come in, but that's something that would have to be decided and coordinated with BIE. North Carolina is the last state to raise the age. Can this grant be used to develop a juvenile pretrial services program to address the needs of juveniles who've been transferred to adult court? I mean, that's an interesting question. The purpose of this program is not so much to address pretrial services or services to individuals that are actually already made contact with the juvenile justice system, but more so from a broader delinquency prevention, community-based approaches to deter young people from moving into the juvenile justice system and being able to provide some of those coordinated community-based wraparound services. And the raise the age and pretrial services are actually a little bit further down the line for youth who are deeper in the system. Does a state university count? If the state university is able to be considered as a state agency and can meet those application criteria under Category 1, they would apply, but most likely the state designated agency would not be attached to a university. And so please take a look at each of those 4 pieces of eligibility in that notice in Category 1 about who is eligible. I'm almost certain that a state university would not be designated as the state-funded agency and eligible to apply, but please take a look at those. Can this award only be made to the state government? Category 1, the funding is made to state agencies who would then sub-grant to local units of government and provide support services in developing that application and awarding those funds. So the answer is yes, under Category 1, awards are only made to the designated state agency. Will an applicant's approved indirect cost rate be allowed to be charged in the budget? OJJDP typically does offer and accept negotiated cost rate agreements with applicants at the time of budget following award. We would review those documents and it would become part of the program's budget. Okay, so there was another question about the school district. I did respond to that question about the school district being an eligible applicant. If not, there used to be a Title II grant for delinquency prevention. Is that available any longer? To the question, the previous version of the Title II delinquency prevention grant that we may have had previous years is not currently being instituted in this way. And so this is the current iteration of the delinquency prevention program that OJJDP currently has available. Okay, I don't believe we have any more questions at the moment, but William, if you want, and Carmen, you want to give it a few more minutes, I think we're open to doing that to see if any other questions come through. Otherwise, applicants or prospective applicants are definitely able to submit any questions that they may have through the response center, and they'll come to our office and will be addressed at that time.
Thank you, Santana. There was a question that came earlier before the webinar. It's related to travel resolution requirements. So the answer is that award recipients will be informed of any additional documentation required if applicable.
Give people maybe a couple of more minutes to submit your questions. And just as a reminder to folks, you can submit your questions here. If you do have a question to come in later on, we do have the response center information here. Carmen and Susanna will give people just maybe a couple more minutes to submit any questions that they may have.
Sure. There's another question that came earlier. Is what is the best tool to do effective delinquency prevention? We will, recommend that you refer to the OJJDP Model Programs Guide for types of evidence-based delinquency prevention programs and practices.
And as a reminder to the audience, you can continue to submit your questions here in the chat window. Again, if you have questions at a later time, we do have the response center information here on the screen and also in the chat window. Carmen and Susanna will give folks maybe about another 45 seconds to 30 seconds to submit their questions. I see people typing, but we'll give them a little bit more to submit their questions here.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, William.
In the meantime, while we're waiting for questions, for those who may have joined a little bit late, please note that we do have handouts available for you in our handouts pod. They include a PowerPoint for today's solicitation webinar and also the actual solicitation that is located, solicitation FAQ as well. We also have the bios for our presenters located in the handouts chat pod as well. So please feel free to submit any of your questions that you have here, and feel free to download any handouts that we have as well. We'll give you all a couple more minutes to submit more questions. Carmen says, and it looks like we do have maybe a few more questions that are coming in from our audience.
Okay, there is a question that says, with the current situation regarding the COVID-19 virus, will the funding agency look more favorably on the inclusion of budgetary items that support technical equipment, such as polycoms and camera, that allow services to be provided in alternative formats? I can tell you that the only categories that OJJDP is actually providing special consideration are those that are listed in the solicitation. And so anything outside of those special considerations will not be granted any additional favor or scoring in the application process.
Okay, there is a question about if there used to be a Title II grant for delinquency prevention. Is that available any longer? I believe this is referring to Title V delinquency prevention program, which the funding went to the DSA or state agencies. So no, that funding is not available currently. So the delinquency prevention funding that is available is the new solicitation that we are talking about in this webinar.
All right, and again, as a reminder to the audience, today's webinar will be recorded and available at a later time. We also have important documents, including handouts located in the handouts pod for you all to download. We'll give everyone maybe a couple more seconds to submit any outstanding questions. If you have a question for later, it can be submitted to the response center. We'll give folks just a few more seconds here to submit any questions they may have.
There's a question that came earlier, is what category will I apply for as American Indian, American Native tribe, wanting to establish a mentoring program for only tribe members' youth? So the answer is either category. Category 1, state funding as a sub-grant, and Category 2 under the Tribal Delinquency Prevention Program. Okay, we see a question. Has OJJDP definitively described what is prevention? Yes. For the definition of prevention, please see the OJJDP Models Program Guide at www.ojjdp.gov/mpg for Model Program Guide.
And I went ahead and placed that website there in the chat for folks to access as well, Carmen, for easy access to our audience.
Oh, thank you, William. That's very helpful. And going back to that question, that also has example of delinquency prevention programs and literature review that's about prevention. That is a great question. It just came up in the chat box. Has there been any consideration regarding the potential of extending the application deadline given the disruption connected to the coronavirus? I'm going to refer to Santana about that. I have not heard as of today any information about extending this particular application.
That is correct, Carmen. That's a good question. OJJDP has reviewed deadlines as it relates to some of our earlier posting solicitations, and we did make adjustments just last week for certain deadlines. This particular solicitation is not one that has been extended to my knowledge, but if there were any extensions that were to be granted for these solicitations, it would be found on the OJJDP or OJP grant funding site. That would be front and center out there, which programs have been extended. And this one is due a little, about a month off, so we have a little bit of time for that.
Yeah, the application is due on Tuesday, April 21st, 2020. But thank you, Santana. That is good to highlight and where they can find the information if OJP decides to extend the deadline for the solicitation.
Sure.
These are very good questions. So, William, do we have a little more time before you move into the announcement?
Yeah, we do. We have about 3 to 4 more minutes that we have. So if anyone else does have any additional questions, or if there's anything else that you all would like to address, feel free to take the next 3 to 4 minutes to do so. Members, as I've stated before, if you all do have questions, maybe at a later date, feel free to send them to the Response Center. If you have any questions about handouts or location of the recording of today's webinar, feel free to contact the OJJDP Help Desk. We'll have that information up shortly. But we can continue to allow for you all to submit any questions you may have. We'll give everyone maybe about another minute or two to submit any outstanding questions that they would like for our presenters. And as a reminder to our audience, you can access the handouts for today's webinar located in the handouts pod directly above the chat pod here as well. Simply click on the name of the document and click the download button to access the files.
As William mentioned earlier, if you have questions after the webinar, after you had an opportunity to think about the information that was shared today, please direct those questions to the Response Center, and we will do our best to respond to you as quickly as possible.
All right. Well, looks like the questions are starting to slow down here, and we only have about maybe a couple more minutes left for today's webinar. So that being said, I'll go ahead and wrap up our presentation. First, wanted to give a huge thanks to our presenter and our moderator, Ms. Carmen Santiago-Roberts, for today's solicitation, as well as the help and assistance with today's questions, Ms. Zanzine. Thank you all very much for today's webinar. Before we wrap up, just wanted to really quickly provide the following information for everyone, which includes the way that they can best contact OJJDP's NTTAC. If you all are interested, you can click on the slide here where you are able to access and contact us with OJJDP. Also, the other way that you can keep up with us is to sign up for our listserv as well. You can also reach out to us on Facebook. Please note that we do have the contact information for the help desk just in case you would like to get in contact with OJJDP. You may contact them at the information on this slide. Do you have a training or technical assistance need? Well, if so, please note that you could submit a request via the OJJDP TTA 360 platform, which is located at this link here. Again, as I've stated throughout today's presentation, please note that today's webinar is indeed being recorded and will be available on our YouTube page. If you'd like to get supporting materials related to today's webinar, including any handouts or other important documents, again, they're available to download here in the virtual room. However, you can contact us and we can help by sending you any of the documents that we have for today's webinar as well. Also, don't forget to join us for a few upcoming events that we have. We have an event coming up on March 25th for another grant solicitation. That's just a couple of days away, so feel free to register or click on the button to learn more about that particular solicitation. Also note we have another solicitation on the 26th that's coming up. Feel free to click on the Learn More button here to learn more about that solicitation, or even the Register Now button if you would like to register for that solicitation. And again, in April and May, we have 2 non-solicitation webinars that are coming up. So please feel free to sign up for those webinars here. Again, you can learn more by clicking the Learn More button, or you can register for those webinars by selecting the registration button there. And again, before we wrap up, for those who are remaining, again, thank you for taking time to attend today's webinar. I do have one last poll question that we will wrap up with. And that final poll question is, how do you plan to apply the information from this webinar in your work? Please note that this is multiple select, meaning that you can indeed go in and select multiple options here. But what we want to know is a little